All right, so the end of section 2.1b, cumulative frequency tables. Can't even remember what I've got here, but this shows a table with only an upper boundary. Sorry for the loudness. We're going to use inequalities on this. It's kind of an interesting thing. We're going to need this in chapter or the next section for ogives when we make some ogives. So we need to know what these cumulative frequency things are. This will be really short and sweet. And our class limits then, when we make a cumulative table, become open-ended. Because cumulative means we're adding, we're accumulating something. So I pulled out the example that we had done last week. I don't think I did the hay bales example. We can just put our stuff in the table that I gave you. So I used the salaries example. Here's all our salary stuff. So I want to make a cumulative frequency table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to block all this out. So first of all, let's make sure everybody's good with cumulative frequency. So cumulative frequency, I think I was messy on this, but I accumulate my frequencies. Cumulative relative, I accumulate the relatives, so that's the decimals. So cumulative frequency, if I start here, all of my pieces of data are 229.5 or less, right? Everything that I've got in this top row. I have to actually start with this because I always want to start with a 0. So I'm going to start with, I got to scooch it in there. I want to start with any pieces of data that are less than 139.5. How many pieces of data do I have that are less than 139.5 in this? 0. We'll take these out too. So then I'm going to go to my next class boundary, less than 229.5. How many pieces of data do I have that are less than 229.5? 11. So then I'm going to scooch down, and I'm going to keep using the upper class boundary. How many pieces of data do I have that are less than 319.5? 16. I'm going to take that 11 and 5. How many pieces of data that are less than 409.5? I've got, did I write that wrong? 16 there. So I should have 20. Does everybody see where my numbers are coming from? All right. Notice the difference between this and the other is that we just did a less than here. And we're just looking at, we're accumulating, so we're kind of adding up all the data with the accumulation, but we're taking those class boundaries into consideration. So now how many pieces of data do I have that are less than 499.5? 24. If I scooch down, how many pieces of data do I have that are less than 589.5? 28. How many pieces of data do I have that are less than 679.5? Still 28. How many pieces of data are less than, what is that, 769.5? 29. We're almost done, guys. How many pieces of data do I have that are less than 859.5? 30 pieces of data. So now here's my cumulative frequency, and I use these boundaries instead of my class limits. So you still have to know your class limits. You have to figure out what the boundaries are, and then you go from there. I won't ask you to make many of those, but it gives you an idea of what those are looking at. It also is a refresher, hopefully, maybe for those relative frequencies. Do I ask you a question at the bottom of the page? I ask you a couple things, don't I? I'll scooch down in just a second. So I'm going to put inequality. with upper bounds. You'll kind of start to recognize these terms. You'll be like, oh, it's cumulative frequency, so I have to accumulate the frequencies. Or it's cumulative relative frequency, so I have to accumulate the relative, the decimal values. And then we'll get those, what goes in the rest of it as far as your inequalities with your upper bounds or whatever those might be. I'm going to scooch down. I know people are looking, but let me scooch down because that's a mess. Let's see. First frequency should always be 0. Why? Isaiah? Yeah, it could be ambiguous if you start with a number. We have to kind of get an idea of where our data begins. So we always start with our lowest boundary so that we know that our data really is grouped within a set of values. Hi. The last frequency should always equal the total amount of data. Why is that? Sorry, the last frequency should always equal the total amount of data values. Why is that? Because you're counting down, right? This is always going to be cumulative. So you're always adding. I'll skip those other 2 questions. We get the idea. Practice is going to be the key to all of this. That's the end of 2.1b. I didn't ask you to do any of those. And I probably will very rarely. Again, the only reason I want to talk about them now is because in the next section we need to use those for an ogive. So, everybody good there? That was exciting, wasn't it?